think the biggest challenge is we just have so much to do. As a company, we're growing super fast. We have all these projects that need to be done. And with all those projects, there's processes that need to get set up so that we're doing things efficiently and cost effectively. And as we try to bring a lot of that in-house, it's just the volume of work is massive.
I don't know. Did we give you a title? Do you have a title?
I think it's technically manufacturing engineer, but
yeah, even though you're not an engineer.
even though I'm not an engineer at all.
Manufacturing guru.
There you go.
Leader of the Nerd Cave.
Yeah.
Head
perfect. Head nerd. Love it.
Yeah.
I need some business cards.
We may actually just change your title to head nerd.
That would be awesome.
So yeah, you're working down in that CNC area, making handles and doing that stuff. But I was curious, like, because how old are you?
29.
29. So when did you start making knives?
I've been making knives for 8 years now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, started in 2017.
How did you get into it?
So I had a buddy. I was doing timber frame homes. I got married, moved up to Idaho to go to school. That kind of took forever. Started with mechanical engineering, ran out of money, dropped out. Started working construction. One of my first employers, his name was Braun Westcott. He started making knives. He'd been blacksmithing and knife making for quite a while. His dad had done it as well. And he had a knife in his shop that was like forged out. It was just a blank, but it didn't have handles or anything. And I was like, dude, what is that? Like, that's really cool. So he let me take that and just like finish the handle on it. And I was like, that was my first dose. Yeah, it was killer. So I mean, for the next couple of years, I was still working construction, basically just making knives like in a parking lot with an angle grinder and like a bench stone, and they were trash.
Were you YouTubing videos and stuff, or?
Yeah, a lot of that. Like, you start going down the rabbit hole, and you find one guy, and then you find like a community of like kind of the handcrafted blacksmith, bladesmith guys. From there, I found like CNC pocket knives, and I was like, this is what I got to do. Like,
really?
Oh, I was sold.
What hooked you on?
Specifically like John Grimsmo. He's up in Canada, but he uses like the best equipment out there. Kern milling machines, Nakamura lathes, lapping, like crazy tolerances. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
You just saw it on like YouTube or something?
I think it was Instagram. Yeah. Okay. Instagram has like a massive knife community.
Right.
You're obviously aware, but
yeah.
So,
what do you think it was about the machines? Was it kind of that nerdier part? Were you always somebody who was pretty intellectual? Like, did you get good grades in school or like math?
No, not really until like probably junior, senior year of high school did I actually like care and get good grades. I was always really kind of artistic. Took a lot of art classes, drawing, sculpture, stuff like that. The knife thing, especially the CNC, I think I'm still very much that creative way, but I enjoy CNC because it's a way that I can take what's in my head, and I don't physically have to like keep my hand steady as I paint a picture or sculpt something, and I can take what's in my head and translate it into a physical object accurately and get what I meant to make out.
Okay, so you saw that, you saw those machines and what he was doing, but like what was your plan then going forward? I mean, you don't have a CNC machine at that point.
No, yeah.
CNC machines, for people that don't know, what is it? Computer numerically controlled? Or,
yep.
They're expensive. I mean, generally, there's different price levels of anything, but even a cheap one for a hobby guy that's
you're
young and
$10,000 into it on a low end setup.
Yeah, and then for people that don't know, I mean, it's computer programming. Frankly, it's a high bar of entry. Like if you go buy a belt grinder, you can just turn it on and stick stuff on it and start making sparks fly and figure it out. But it's definitely a learning process. So how did you go about that part of it?
So I actually went to community college down in Idaho. They had a machine tool technology program.
Was that the like the catalyst of it? Was this like you saw this guy making knives with machines and you're like, I'm going to school for this?
So I basically went to school to learn CNC specifically to make knives.
Sure.
Like a lot of people kind of do it the other way around. They learn CNC and then they figure out where to apply it. I've always just been obsessed with knives since I was a tiny little kid. And so I think that was a really good outlet to still have kind of an intellectual half, and learn applicable skills for all sorts of aspects of my life.
Right.
But have that still apply to what I'm passionate about and what I love.
Right. Sure. The hand making of knives. Did you make very many knives then by hand? Like, did you do quite a bit?
Yeah. So I mean, I still enjoy that. To say that like CNC is a good way to get the idea out of my head into a physical object. Like I still very much enjoy hand making a knife. You can do a lot of things free form just in the moment that would take weeks and weeks and weeks of figuring out how to do it on the computer or on a CNC machine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, out of school, basically my last semester in school, I got hired at another knife company down in Idaho, which was a great opportunity. They didn't have anyone in the position that I had started there previous to me, so it was kind of an open book. I got
straight out of school.
Yeah, I basically got to define my role there. We did a lot of OEM manufacturing as well for other companies, and so that was fun because it was super high mix of projects and different types of knives. A lot of that was still like hand prototyping before it would go into CNC, or collaborating directly with these makers that are in the industry that I'd seen before and respected. And
right.
It was a really fun opportunity.
You said something that's interesting. You know, there's, I'm going to be speaking as a keynote speaker at a high school graduation here in a few weeks. And, you know, one of the things that you see high school kids, you know, they're told like, you know, you got to go to college, and it's tough because you think of the typical, like even the way that you set off with engineering. I actually did the same thing, construction engineering, you know, but it's not necessarily for everyone. With CNC machining, to go to like a community college and learn CNC machining, one thing that struck me that you were saying is, you know, you can use it for anything. So like you can have this goal of making knives, and maybe you do that. Maybe you end up making some knives as a hobby or whatever. But the beautiful thing about going to school for like a CNC machining and programming degree is that you can literally make anything. Like you can literally go get a job making freaking anything. There's machine shops all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, outside of that, it gives you a really good awareness of how things are made. Yeah. So I mean, if I need to fix a car, or I'm looking at this microphone right now, like I understand how parts are manufactured.
Yeah.
And that goes a huge way to all aspects of your life, just understanding how things work and what you can do to fix them and how you can make a replacement for something. It's awesome.
I don't think a lot of high school kids, you know, there's jobs out there like that. Most high school kids, unless their dad's a knife maker or they know somebody that's in some kind of manufacturing, high school kids just don't generally know what a CNC mill is or
there's
a lathe.
Almost no exposure.
Right, which is sad because maybe later in life they find it and they're like, God dang, I wish I would have known about this when I was in my early 20s, not when I'm in my mid 30s.
Yeah.
You know, so that's where, you know, this gets me off on a little tangent on like wishing that school systems did a better job of bringing a lot more trades and craftsmen, you know, and just business people in general in to talk to students, not necessarily when they're seniors, but even when they're like freshmen.
Oh, absolutely.
About what's out there, because I had this idea. You know, I didn't like school. I hated school. I didn't see the point. My life was set out. I was going to run my parents' excavation business and make knives on the side, you know.
Yeah.
So, of course, that was my mindset, that I didn't need to know algebra and calculus and all that. But I think if schools brought the biggest thing I think that kids lack is not that I couldn't have gotten good grades, but if I could have related as to why I needed to, you know, if someone like you came in and said, well, here's some of the kinds of math I do, or here's some of the stuff that you have to figure out with computer programming, or, you know, figuring out angles or whatever, I think kids would more likely respect that and want to pay attention in their next 3 or 4 years of math.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it was a practical application of the things that you're learning, like if you went out to a job site and distances or angles or volume measurements applied
my
to
dad
it.
always said, why doesn't your math teacher take all you guys out to my gravel pit and figure out how much gravel's in a pile of gravel?
Exactly.
How many cubic yards are in that cone?
Yeah.
Because the area of a cone, when you're sitting in math class, kids like, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
What is that for?
There's no real world connection to it.
It's just a triangle on a piece of paper. There's no dimension to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting how that. I think that would resonate so much better with kids, young, especially boys, but boys and girls. You know, the lineman job that I had, for example, I always remembered thinking like, who the hell? I don't care who Pythagorean is and what his theorem is, you know. And then you're standing on a job site and the foreman's like, all right, you need to cut a guy wire. You know, how long is the length of that, you know, the long leg of a triangle?
Yeah, it's like,
and you're like, and they're like, I'm like, well, how do you figure that out? And they're like, well, haven't you ever done Pythagorean's theorem? And it's like, oh, are you serious? This is what it was
that's
for?
what that was? Yeah.
You're like, that would have made more sense if you'd have said, instead of A and B, you would have said power pole and ground.
Yeah.
You know, an anchor point, and like, how long does your wire need to be?
Yep.
I'd have been like, oh, I don't know, that's kind of cool. I'll figure that out, you know, instead of this is dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
What was school like? Was that a 2-year program?
It was. They offered a 1-year kind of certificate operator course if you wanted to be like the guy that basically gets hired to stand at the machine and like change tools and push the button and do that. But they did a really good job. The program's actually shut down now from that particular school, which is sad because we still definitely need those people.
Same with the one here in Missoula.
It kills me.
It is sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our instructor was awesome. He's an older guy. He was like a 4th generation machinist. Like his dad built like the titanium cowlings for the SR-71 Blackbird. Like super cool guy. He's been machining for like 55 years.
Those
just
are
an encyclopedia.
You want those people involved.
Oh yeah, he was the best, and he was great because he would let us come in after hours or like basically any time you wanted to learn, he was available, and
that's cool.
And you had the resources to do it. And so outside of our like hours that we're getting credit for, there was so much other opportunity to go in and just understand how the machines work and practice and do all this other stuff.
If you wanted to make stuff, did you have to buy material, like kind of supply your own materials?
Some. He was pretty good about that. Like if it was small projects and stuff, he's like, yeah, like you're paying tuition here. All the stock up in the room is yours. So like, even if it's outside of a school project, like as long as I approve it, go ahead. Mm-hmm. And that was awesome. Just not having to pay extra on top of tuition to do all this extra work.
What kinds of equipment in there did you get training on?
So they had a pretty good variety. They had some 3D printers that we started with. They had a manual lathe and mill combo. They did not have a surface grinder, but they had 2, I think it was a Haas TM1 is like their entry-level two-room mill, but it's CNC. And then they had a TL1 lathe, which is kind of a weird machine. It's Haas made it to help convert people from conventional traditional machining with hand wheels to CNC. And so it could take code, it had a control panel, but then it also had wheels. It was a weird machine. Mm-hmm. And then they had a larger C-axis, fully CNC Haas lathe as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So getting into, and I have no problem mentioning the name Schenck Knives.
Yeah.
They do good work. Getting into business there at Schenck, I mean, you're really pretty damn inexperienced. Did you have pretty good mentors there, or did you kind of really, I mean, it sounds like you were one of the first people kind of in that area, so did you just have to figure a lot of stuff out?
Yeah, so they had basically bought a machine. They bought a Haas VF2SS CNC mill probably 6 months before I started, 6 months to a year. The owner of the company, Norm Schenck, he's been making knives since like the 60s. Mm-hmm. He knows everybody, like makes incredible Damascus, awesome guy. His son Zane's running the company. They bought this mill, just kind of seeing where manufacturing is going. Didn't really have anybody to run it. His brother Jordan was figuring it out as he went, and I'm like shocked that he got as far as he did. Like he was making light switch, like plate covers out of Damascus.
Yeah.
Just figuring it out. I started there. We started pushing more into the high production CNC OEM space. but it was just a lot of figuring it out. So, I mean, even outside of the physical machining and programming, like, how do I quote a customer? How do I bid this job? What do I charge as a shop rate? How do I organize this? How do I build a pricing spreadsheet? Like, there's so many other aspects of business and entrepreneurship that nobody really teaches you.
And the challenge with what you're doing there too is you're getting random drawings and ideas from knife makers all over the country.
Oh yeah.
And so you just never know what's going to get thrown at you on what day.
Yeah, I mean, like literally napkin sketches coming in, and then you have to turn that into like a precision CAD model. And how do I make 10 of these? How do I make a single prototype? How do I make 1,000 of these economically and efficiently and in a good time frame? So, I mean, it was kind of getting thrown into the deep end, but it was great from a personal development standpoint. Like, it was awesome. There was as many hours as I wanted to work. It was meeting all these really cool people and cool projects that I'm actually passionate about, instead of just like punching in for a 9-to-5 day job and staring at a wall.
So what's your, this is I think an argument in some spaces of the corners of the internet and corners of knife room showrooms, is the argument of what's handmade versus what's not handmade. What's in this, there's terminology, there's custom knives, there's handmade knives, there's production knives, there's mid-tech knives, it's like there's all these different layers of knives. And I think it's really knife makers that are the ones that actually get most concerned with these terms. The customers to see a knife.
Yeah.
They're just like, that's cool, I want to buy that.
Yep.
And it is a challenge though a little bit, because as someone who got to a really high level of custom knife making, and this is where this argument can really go down a rabbit hole. I could look at, and I didn't really do this, though I do think there's a difference between like a handmade custom knife and a CNC knife. Like, there's just a difference.
Without a doubt.
There's a difference in talents. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that one way is like more important or necessarily better than the other, because you could always argue that the machine-made knife is going to quote-unquote be tighter tolerance or whatever. But it's also very impressive when someone can hand-make a knife to super high tolerances as well.
For sure.
Some of the top makers in the world. But it's a difference in where a maker chose to spend his time learning, right? Like, a custom maker may spend their time learning techniques, hand filing stuff, grinding, doing whatever, and someone like yourself might spend your time learning programming and learning about tooling and work holding and all this different stuff and how things go together. It gets into this weird debate, because let's take me for, I could say, well, if you use a CNC machine on a knife, it's not handmade. But then when you came to work here on my custom side, I had a jet mill drill sitting in my shop over there that had, knobs on it to turn and make the table go back and forth. Yep. I was controlling that machine by hand, but that's a milling machine. Another knife maker, so I might slot a guard with that.
Yeah.
Mill a pocket, a fuller down a blade is a great example. I was using it to mill fullers on blades or a groove on a spine, and people would be like, oh, look at that fuller, it's so great. Now, another knife maker could look at me, because I could look at, say, you and say, well, your knife's not handmade.
Oh, yeah.
You use a CNC.
Yeah, where's the line?
But then there's another knife maker that could look at me and say, well, I hand filed and ground. I ground with my grinder my fuller in and hand finished it.
Yep.
And then the next guy below him could say, well, I didn't have a belt grinder. Like, I scraped mine in. Don Fogg went into this time period later in his career where he sold his belt grinder and all his power tools. I mean, he was hand scraping blades, filing. My point of this is like, who's right? And the answer is nobody's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's all tools. Like, even within like the knife community and like Blade Show, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, they came out with like another category of awards called MAC. It's Machine Assisted Custom Knives. And so I think it's because there was kind of
how do you define that
debate as like,
It must be CNC, right?
Yeah, it's like, say I have a CNC mill, but I make 10 knives a year, and they're super high quality, but I'm using the CNC. It's like,
yeah, like
where do you put that
Tori
guy?
Fogaritsu, Kai Embritson, there's certain guys out there. There's who's overseas there? Jürgen Steinau.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know what they're using CNC for and what they're using regular machines for, but I mean, some of these knives are very they're high tech looking.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like, for example, one of the guys that got me into knife making was Michael Walker, like godfather of knife making.
Yeah, of the liner lock folder.
Yeah, and like he's got an old 80s wire EDM in his shop and mills and lathes, and like the knives he makes are insane, but he's using all these incredible high tolerance tools, and so it's like,
yeah, if you see a slot that I make with a piece of pearl fit into it,
yeah,
I handmade the slot and then handmade the piece of pearl to go in it.
Yeah.
Now, that you could argue also that could be better than say Michael wire EDM in a slot and mill in a piece of pearl to go in it, or just dumber that I did it that way, and because it's kind of one of those like, well, if I had the ability and the know-how, and if I had that machine,
that's the thing is, like, if you have the machine, like, a tool is a tool. If I have a hammer,
right,
like, and an anvil compared to a power hammer, like, am I going to use the hammer and anvil because the other one like swings it for me?
It's a great point. Like, does my hydraulic press and my rolling mill make me less of a Damascus maker than the guy that just has an anvil?
Yeah, it's all a tool.
Yeah. Where I do get upset, and I do think people have a right, is when people aren't transparent.
Oh yeah.
When a customer's standing at your table and they're like, "Well, how did you do that?" And you say, "Well, I just made a slot here," or and you do get people that like, I make everything by hand or whatever.
And, for sure.
They're not saying like, I chucked it up in my mill and I milled a slot in 7 seconds.
Yeah. It's like, don't be dishonest. Like, if you have a good end product, it doesn't matter how it got there, but like, tell them how it got there.
And again, customers don't care. They're genuinely curious. They like what they're looking at.
Yeah.
And that's where you do see there is still handwork involved in a lot of these, machine assisted or whatever. What was that term you said?
MAC, machine assisted custom knives.
Yeah. You still see people, they'll use machines for this and that and whatnot, but then they still do unbelievable hand carving or gold inlay.
Oh yeah.
Engraving, different things. A lot of the blades are hand ground. Most of them are hand finished,
Yep.
So I've generally just stayed out of all that. I do. It does bother me again when people aren't just honest.
For sure.
Now, if Don Fogg brings a blade to Blade Show that's hand scraped and hand filed and hand, like, everything with no power equipment, and I know I've used a belt grinder on all mine, 100% I'm like, I give him props. Like, damn.
Oh, that's
some dedication.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's hours and hours of someone's life put into a physical.
Yeah, you're
object.
talking like medieval style form of making something.
Yeah.
Without electricity, essentially. But yeah, it's interesting. Every industry has their drama.
Without a doubt.
For a short time back in the early 2000s, I'd get a little bit involved in. I mean, as young as in my early 20s, and you get on. Back then, it was blade forums.
Yep.
I mean, social media wasn't really a thing.
Still going strong.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
You'd go to forums to, bitch with each other and bitch about things. And for a short time there, I'd get involved into some little things here and there, and then pretty quickly, and I think it was a couple older knife makers that were like, I'd be like, why don't you get on there and defend yourself or defend knife making? And they're like it's just
I'm too busy making knives.
I'm too busy. Yeah, like, how much per hour am I making sitting there?
Yeah,
0.
exactly.
Like, and that's the thing, when you're a custom knife maker, it's actually one of the challenges is if you're not working, you're not making money.
Yep.
You get paid for only the hours you work, and only the productive hours, because if you screw anything up,
rework you don't bill that separately.
Backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was where did you grow up?
Kind of all over the place. We moved about every 2 years. I moved probably a dozen times before I was 18. My dad did e-commerce, internet marketing for companies, but a lot of the times they'd hire him because they had a problem in that area, and then he'd go in and fix it, and they'd be like, "Oh, like we're fixed now, thanks," and then we'd pick up and move somewhere else.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of Texas, Utah, lived in Bozeman during most of high school, Oregon, Northern California, Chicago.
What was that like for you? Did it frustrate you, or was it just kind of like?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't my favorite. I had a lot of resentment growing up because of that. Basically just leaving friends every 2 years, like, sucks.
Can't develop relationships.
And then after a while, like, you kind of start not making friends, anticipating the next move. But that being said, like, looking back, I think personally, like, it helped me develop. It helped me understand how to connect with people and adapt to situations and not just be so locked down and rigid in a mindset or in where I'm at. Sure.
Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I've got 3 younger sisters, and then I actually have a brother that we kind of just found. My mom had him before, so I'm the oldest, 3 younger sisters. My brother's 3 years older than me. I think he's 32. My mom had him before she met my dad, had to give him up for adoption, had always wanted to reconnect with him and find him.
And did you know you had a missing brother out there? Like,
I did. They told me, I think when I was 18.
So they waited quite a while.
It was a while, yeah. And I mean, it's kind of funny, like on my birthday list every year till I was probably 16, I was like, I want a brother. Like,
really?
Like, literally written on paper, like, I want a brother for my birthday.
God, and they didn't tell you.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like, looking back, I'm sure that just was like a knife in my mom's heart every year. It was like, well, you do have one, but no,
it'd be tough to tell you because it'd be hard. Like, how do you tell you, like, you have one, but I don't know where he's at? Like,
yeah, and then it's like, even if they did tell me, like, what do you do? Like, well, now you know, but it still doesn't. Nothing's changed.
What was the deal with her having to give him up? Was that
I think she was just young. Thing, it was probably part of her parents. I know she did want to keep him. It was pretty complicated. I don't know the whole situation. But he basically got adopted, but all the records were sealed. So we don't know, like, where he went or what family he went to or what his name was now, like anything about him. Sure. I think she had him like for an hour before he went off to.
God, I can't imagine how hard that would have been on her.
Oh, it crushed her. And I mean, even like every year on his birthday, like she would just be super depressed and like it was always a hard day. But we found him this year at the beginning of the year, like 3 days before his birthday. When I got married, we moved up to Idaho. I was working construction. With a guy named Fred. Super cool guy from Kenya. He's got a crazy story. He knew my brother, Alex, through some totally other relation, and actively knew him while I was working construction with Fred, which was weird.
Yeah, so you knew Fred, and Fred knew him.
Yeah, but we didn't know each other. Yeah.
Right, none of you
like
knew.
They were good friends, and me and Fred were good friends. We never crossed paths. But then, like, back in January of this year, Fred, I hadn't talked to him in 5 years probably. He's texted me. He's like, hey, man, like, is your mom's maiden name Rogers? And I was like,
that's a weird random
Yeah, I was
question.
like, and it was like, that was the first question. And I didn't even know
I'm trying
if
to
it was
hack into
still.
Our bank account.
That's the thing. I was like, I didn't even know if it was still Fred. I was like, who is this? Like, why do you need to know that? But yeah, I mean, turns out like, Fred, it was some like social media connection, like the last name Alex had got from the records somewhere, like super weird connection. But yeah, we found him. He lives like 5 minutes away from my parents' house down in Utah, which is crazy. Super nice guy. He's married. Like, we are so excited that we found him. So
that's really cool.
It's awesome.
I can't imagine how emotional that was for your mom.
Oh, I mean, yeah, super emotional, but also like all the aspects, like, is he going to be super resentful that I gave him up? Like, is he dead? Is he a drug addict somewhere? Like, there's so many possibilities that are just constantly going through your mind that, how do you know? But I mean, it was literally best case scenario. Like, fantastic guy, wonderful wife, super close, like
And how old's he now?
I think he's 32.
Yeah.
He might have just turned 33.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. It's awesome that they've gotten to connect. I'm sure being 5 minutes away, I'm sure they probably have spent quite a bit of time.
Oh yeah. Catching up.
Yeah.
Making up for lost time.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, you went to high school in Bozeman?
Yeah. So I did half of eighth grade through junior year in Bozeman.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you play sports in high school, or what were like things you were into?
Yeah, I did track, did like high jump, long jump, hurdles. I hate running, so I just kind of did all the jumping stuff. And then outside of that, like Bozeman was actually great because they're kind of like a artsy community. Mm-hmm. And so we had like a jewelry class at Bozeman High School, which was awesome because it was metalworking and like, I say precision. It was still all hand done and filed and stuff, but like you're learning how to solder and work with precious metals, and like you can actually sell your work. We would have little show days.
Jewelry, doing the jewelry stuff is really, really cool. I mean, I got for a while into doing, like gold and some silver stuff on knives, and frankly, I would like ask questions at like the blade show of, Delana or somebody like that. And then just come home and buy this stuff and hard solder and soft solder and medium and different colors of gold. And dude, I melted. I've probably ruined at least 10 grand in gold, like heating it.
Yeah. Like I had wrong temperatures, wrong solders.
My God. I had this knife that I made, I'll show it to you, but this, I should find it, Henry, for you to put over the top of this, like the YouTube part of this, but this cap that went on this Bowie knife with it was all gold all the way around, and I had soldered one whole half of it together. Now I used to work a lot of late nights, so I'd probably like 9, 10 o'clock at night out there soldering. It's dark outside, soldered it all together. I'm like super proud of myself. This thing is like looking amazing.
Yep.
All right, getting tired, don't want to make a mistake. So next day I come out, cut the other pieces, get it fit up, and I'm sitting there heating, and you can, as you know, like when you heat up steel or gold or whatever, it'll turn color. It'll get red hot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there heating, and I'm waiting to see the same color that I'd seen the night before. And gold goes from just getting hot to melting in an like instantaneous.
Yeah.
It doesn't like start to.
Yeah, it doesn't start to like droop. It just goes from like solid to puddle,
dude,
immediately.
It just like I was heating this whole thing because it's kind of the heat sink part of it, and I'm trying to keep everything even temperature so then my solder will flow right. And I'm like, think I'm getting close, and it just like went away. It just all completely melted away, like blew a hole, just completely deformed it. It was probably $2 or $3 grand worth of gold.
Ugh.
And what I had figured out was that, it was a bright sunny morning. My shop window where I was doing that is facing east. The sun's coming through. So, it's why we tell people when you make knives not to just count on color for like figuring out your temperature of your steel when you're heating it.
Yeah.
If you're hand making knives, what you see as red hot in a dark room is a lot different than red hot when you're standing outside in front of your shop on a bright sunny day.
Yeah.
You'll be several hundred degrees difference.
It's a hard lesson.
Oh God. It was actually a really good, it got me into a bind for quite some time because I was pretty much paycheck to paycheck. And this was a huge project that was going to like pay well.
Yeah.
But as custom makers know, you don't get paid till you're done. And, what happened was I basically couldn't afford to replace the gold. So then I had to like go make some other knife orders to try to like build up a little bit of money to turn around and order gold to start over on this project. And now not confident that I can even do it.
Yeah.
And it was a situation where I should have been just more honest with the customer and called him and told him what happened. Instead, I'm like, kind of keep pushing it back, like, oh, hey, I'm not going to hit the deadline that I gave you. It'll be a couple more months or whatever. And I kept pushing it back. And he finally got frustrated. He's like, dude, like you were sending me pictures of this knife like months ago.
Like, what happened?
Like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And you were so close to done. What's going on? And finally, I kind of like explained the whole thing to him. And he was like, he's some rich dude. And he was like, bro, would have just bought the gold. Like, and I was like, yeah, but that's not, like, it wasn't your fault.
Oh, it's a pride thing too.
Yeah,
it's
I didn't expect him to pay for my mistake.
Yeah.
But you know, he would have. He was cool about it. But by that point, he was getting kind of upset.
Yeah.
Had I just called him up and say, here's what happened, and I don't have the money to replace this, so it's going to take me some months to get some money together. And he could have said, all right, well, let me know when it's done. Or he could have said, I'll just send you a check.
Yeah.
You know, for him, it was a couple grand. I mean, he's buying a $12,000 knife.
Yeah.
He clearly has the money, but that doesn't mean it's right for me to expect for him to pay for my screw-ups. So
yeah, no, I get it.
I just didn't handle that perfectly. I was probably mid-20s, you know. Like you say, ego.
But you learn, though. I mean, if we didn't have those experiences in our 20s, it's
right.
You grow up without knowing those lessons. So
right, yeah. So you also grew up, and I asked you if I could ask you this, but did you grow up Mormon like your whole childhood?
Yeah. So I mean, born into the church. My parents are LDS. Grew up that way. Went on a mission when I was 18, which was great.
So I'm curious about. I've never talked to anybody about that. You see Mormon kids going on missions.
Yeah.
What is the deal around all of that? Like, I'm completely ignorant when it comes to that stuff. Like,
for sure,
the reason behind it and how you go, where you decide to go, who goes with you, like all that stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of the largest service organizations in the world. Thousands and thousands of missionaries out there. You basically, I think 18 is the youngest that you can do it, and I think they changed that. It used to be 19. You basically submit your papers that say, hey, my name's Dylan Tanner, I want to go on a mission, and then from there, they assign you somewhere in the world. And you'll get to wherever you're going, and you get paired up with a companion.
Just one person?
Yeah. You get paired up with another person. Usually you'll live in like an apartment or something with a couple other companionships. So there'll be like either 4 or 6 or however many people. And then there's different areas. So I got called to the Brazil Maceió mission, which is like right on the east corner of Brazil. It kind of pokes out right on the corner. There's 2 little states right there. So our mission was those 2 little states, and you get assigned to different areas within your mission. So I got called to Brazil. They, at the time, had a bunch of visa problems. So the first 11 months of my 2-year mission was in New York. The mission was New York South. It was like Long Island, Staten Island. I think it stopped right at Manhattan. So like Queens, Brooklyn, all that area. That was awesome.
So what did you do for that first 11 months? What did you do there?
So yeah, I mean, basically the same thing. A lot of people see missionaries and think they just run around like, hey, like, have you heard about Jesus? And
right.
It's not really like that. The majority of what we're doing on a mission is service. Like, that's our number one thing, is service projects for other people, just finding people in the community that need help or need food or need someone to come mow their yard or clean up. It's finding help and being able to help when you're needed. It's a really good opportunity, especially as a young kid. Like, when you're 18, you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything. And like, I think if a lot of people knew what a mission entailed before they went, you'd have way less people that go.
Oh, really?
They're super hard. Like, you're basically 18 and you leave your family for 2 years, like at the drop of a hat, usually to a foreign country where you don't speak the language, you don't know the food, you don't know the customs of what they do there. It's like Brazil, I had to learn Portuguese. Our conversations are in Portuguese. They have different food, they have different mannerisms, different body language, different customs. And as a young boy turning into a young man, it's like, that's really getting thrown in the deep end.
Yeah. So like in New York, who like, does the church pay for your rent in your apartment or whatever? And
so yeah, you
like your food,
basically as a missionary, you put in a certain amount. It's the same for every missionary everywhere. You put in the same amount, and obviously some places are more expensive to live, some are a lot cheaper to live, and so that all just kind of equals out. The church figures out the difference there. So you pay your amount, you go out. I think I think for mine it was like 10 grand.
Do you also work a job while you're out there? I mean, or is there any revenue generated at all, or
Nope.
like who's paying for your food?
So it's all the church. So you pay your initial amount. Anything outside of that just comes from the tithing that church collects anyway.
Yep.
But they cover
So you're
housing.
eating steak and lobster every night out there?
Yeah, definitely not. No, New York is that's another lesson is like they'll cover housing, and then you get like a monthly stipend for food, and you go to the grocery store and buy what you
New
need.
York's freaking expensive.
Oh my gosh, man. Like I get out there, it's the first time I'm living alone. Or I guess outside of my family, I'm with another guy who's 18, and now we're at the grocery store looking at like a $7 gallon of milk. And I'm like, how does anyone live in the world? Like how do you not live with your family? It's crazy.
Slap of reality.
Yeah. But on the flip side, like you go down to Brazil and we're living on like $40 a month because everything's dirt cheap, and it's just complete opposite side of the coin.
So like out in New York, are you taking the subway everywhere, taking the bus system?
Yep.
So how's your big, tall, white ass? Are you nervous? I mean,
100%.
Let's face it. I mean, you stick out.
No, it's not like
a little bit,
especially like the areas. So in New York, I was in Richmond Hill, Queens, and our area covered East New York, a bunch of project buildings, Jamaica Ave, like definitely not where a 6'3" white guy is typical.
Yeah.
And that was like a big lesson is like before I went out there, like East New York used to be like the murder capital of the U.S. Same with
so
area.
Are you helping murder people? Like,
yeah,
I mean, you're there to help.
exactly. Like the church issues you a handgun, you just get out. No, it was super fun though. It was really intimidating getting called to that area of New York, and at the time, the mission I got called to in Brazil was like the third highest murder rate in the world.
Damn.
Just a lot of drug trafficking, crime, guns are illegal down there, and so all the bad guys basically knew you had no gun.
Yeah.
But they did, and they did whatever they want with it. So before you go, you read those things online, because as soon as you get your call, you immediately start Googling everything about where you're going.
Right.
So I'm reading all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my mom's kind of freaking out. Like, are you gonna like be alive in a year?
Right.
But that being said, like actually going there and talking to those people, and I mean, having lunch with people in project buildings and helping clean up like an old veterans home and stuff, like they're all people. Like everyone out there is just a person. Like there's not just some arbitrary crime out there that's waiting to happen to you. Like, yes, that stuff does happen. Like I saw people get shot in Brazil. Like,
did you really?
Yeah. Like the crime's definitely there. And I think part of it is like, as missionaries, we're out there, we're in like a white shirt and tie and slacks. Like we look like missionaries, and especially in those local areas, people understand why we're there. They understand what we're doing for their communities. Like this is where they live, and we're a force for good.
Right.
So a lot of the crime doesn't specifically happen to the missionaries. But outside of that, like they're really nice people. Like,
yeah.
I love I'm still in touch with people from New York and from Brazil, like wonderful people, best friends in the world.
How much time do you spend, kind of spreading the word versus out like volunteering? Is it kind of every day you spend a couple hours a day walking around spreading the word, or?
It depends.
And also, how do you do that as a, did you feel like you were prepared well as an 18-year-old to go in and, talk about Jesus, or, because you're knocking on doors. I mean, it might be a 75-year-old person that's well-versed in religion.
Oh yeah, they're out there for sure. And
maybe they're already Mormon, or maybe they're Islamic. Maybe
every
especially
race.
in New York. I mean, you're going to get a huge melting pot of religions out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, some of the areas in our mission in New York, like street by street, it would change. Like you'd have a street that was Jamaican, and then the next street would be Dominican, and the next street was Colombian, and like the one over here is Chinese, or like this.
Well, I can't imagine the challenge if you get somebody, not the person that slams the door on you, but the person that's like, no, come on in, and then they want to tell you for 2 hours, well, you should be Jewish.
Oh no, it happens all the time. Like, yeah, it was.
How do you navigate that?
It was a big shock. A lot of it's just like, listening to the people and what they're actually saying instead of just being so set and like, I'm LDS, like this is the only way you have to be. Like you more just try to relate with people, and like I could care less if you join our church or not. Like I don't care. I'm here specifically because I haven't found another group of people that are so welcoming and open and willing to help at the drop of a hat.
Right.
Like everywhere I've moved in those 12 moves before I was 18, every time we would move there, there'd be a group of people there to help us unload the truck or bring us a meal or any, and it's like outside of the religious aspect of it, it's just a wonderful community to be a part of. And I think a lot of people don't have that. And so I think as a missionary, when you're out there trying to not necessarily convert people to your religion, but just show them that like, hey, outside of like these guys in shirts and ties walking around knocking on doors talking about Jesus, like this is a really good community to be a part of. And if you're a single person or if you're alone or a widow or whatever, like, and you need a support structure in your life, like this is a pretty good option.
It's a really great point, and it's, you know, I'm not a very religious person myself. I just I've tried to go to church, and I've seen hypocrisy and
without a doubt
some churches that just make me really wonder. And I also really have this problem with this seemed like a few of the people I was around when I were young preached this, and it never made sense to me. But basically, like, if you don't believe in what we believe in, you're going to hell, and anyone in the world that doesn't believe exactly what we believe is going to hell. And it's like, well, so you mean like the whole entire other half of the globe that's brown and believes, whether they're Hindu, Muslim, whatever, like, even though like some of those people might be really, really good people, and they're just herding their goats around and they're taking care of their kids and they're doing their best, like they're just wrong. Like,
it's like because that guy hasn't talked to you, he's not going to make it. Like,
or if I don't if I don't come to that wood building on Sunday, and instead I take my kids fishing, like that, you know, I'm breaking some rules or something. And it just, a lot of that stuff bothered me. But what I will say, with a lot of what you kind of consider the downfall of America in the last couple generations is it's hard to argue, to me, where our country was 100, 150 years ago, where, you know, Christianity and religion was, I'd say, you know, 90% of the country. I mean, of some form.
Oh, yeah.
Different. They weren't all Catholic, but, you know, different forms of Christianity. It feels like we've gotten away from values. And that's the thing I've always said with church, whatever religion it is if everybody just lived the life of like, love your neighbor, be good to your neighbor.
For sure.
Love your wife, raise good kids, do the right thing. Like, we'd all just be better off. And so the further we do as a society get away from those values, through whatever church or whatever that is that gets people to that point, the further we get away from that, the more downhill our society's going. And I mean, now we can't even figure out what the hell a man or a woman is. You know, so it does feel like there's a we're losing our bearing or our true north for sure.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not super big into religion, it's pretty easy to point to that by getting away from those values, and a lot of that is maybe kids being raised in that setting of keeping them somewhat on the straight and narrow, even while they struggle and go through identity crises and shit like that. And that community, that's one thing I will say, like, I know, you know, quite a few Mormon people, and every one of them are the nicest damn people. You know, I mean, just super, super nice people.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that community aspect. It's like, I could care less whether you believe Jesus was the savior, but you can't really argue with like the principles that we try to live by. And as a community, whether it's religious, you're part of a church organization, whether it's Boy Scouts, whether it's any of these other organizations where you have an opportunity to get together as a group of people and you're kind of responsible for the people next to you, and they know that you're available to help, you know that they're available to help. Just having that is so important. I think a lot of the reasons today that kind of our society's going the way it is everyone feels so entitled to like absolute free will and like free decision making, like at a detriment, in most cases.
Yeah, there's no like kind of they're lacking some guiding principles.
Yeah, like keep morality and principles is just kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah, and the other thing that's bothersome is for 20 years, I mean it's been going on a lot longer than that, but just since 9/11, you turn the TV on and you see wars happening and like what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, and now Iran's looking at bombing Israel, and Israel's calling in doctors today. I mean, I was reading the news this morning. And you see so many of the world problems right now are people fighting over religion.
100%.
And just not respecting each other's differences.
Yeah.
And it's definitely more of a Western thing to kind of respect, someone else's differences. I mean,
yeah, nowhere else in the world really does that.
No, definitely not to the degree that we do. But there's also a lot of people in our country that, given the opportunity, they may not either. They believe really strongly in what they do, and
for sure.
And it's unfortunate too. With I think it's a huge downfall in America too. Rogan was talking about this yesterday, and I was listening to his podcast. If you were to play, what's that game where like word association game, and you say,
I think I was listening to that one.
Catholic priest, and
they're like
word
pedophile. Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate because, let's face it, most of our nation and a lot of our world was Catholic, especially early on.
Oh, yeah.
And there are a lot of guiding principles that are good through, Catholicism and through different religions and whatnot. But unfortunately, if you're 16 today and you've just been on the internet and read news, you don't necessarily think of that when you hear Catholic.
Oh, and they just start associating that with all the good aspects of those teachings. It's like, well, that guy, here's how he lived, and this is how he ended up. So it's like,
and the Catholic
maybe I don't.
The Catholic Church is guilty for not, dealing with that much stronger way,
transparently,
decades ago.
Sure.
Had they done that and dealt with that, that wouldn't be the first word associated. When you hear
absolutely
a Catholic priest, and so it's unfortunate because I do think, like I say, we'd all be better off had they dealt with that and had other situations gotten handled better.
Yeah.
But and I have an aunt that is very, very religious, but she's also not the kind of person that's going to push it on you or whatever. But like, if everyone just lived like she did and was as kind as she is, like everybody would sign up for whatever the heck she's got going.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Did you find that here, moving here, the Mormon community was pretty accepting and?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have a great group here. A lot more people in Missoula. I'm like right on the edge of Mineral County, so we go to like a really small group out in Superior. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's great. Like, there's people that have been going to that same building that I go to for 50 years now. Like, old farmers and just people who have lived in the area their entire life.
Right. There's a pretty big community here in Frenchtown. I mean,
you've got the church like right across the freeway there.
Right. Yeah, no, I've always found it interesting and kind of wondered about the missionary thing with down in Brazil. You said you actually saw people get shot down there, and
so I mean, the second town that I lived in, really high crime rate. I mean, it was a town of probably 45,000 people, and there was at least a funeral a day at the cemetery. It was like right in the middle of town every single day. You could walk by and there's people out for a funeral. That being said, like a lot of the people in that town were fantastic, like the most salt of the earth, humble people you've ever met in your life. But our apartment was kind of halfway through the town. The town was like a big hill. And so like you would sit on the balcony of our apartment and the streets kind of like it feels like a 45-degree angle. There's a house across from us. There was a little field next to that. We're just sitting there, like our legs hanging off the balcony, eating dinner one night. And a guy walks around the corner of the house. Another guy's coming up the hill, shoots him twice in the chest, casually walks back up the hill. The dude's like stumbling down the hill, and we're just like sitting there eating our rice and beans. And I mean, as like a 19-year-old kid, you're like, oh my gosh, like what is going on here?
What did you do? Did you go help the guy, or did you just?
No, there was a bunch of other people walking around. Like
people were there.
Yeah, it was getting dark, but like there's always people around.
Do they have like a 911 system, or I mean, how do you call for help?
Yeah, I mean, they have police, but it's not. They're not as responsive. They're not as. There's a lot of corruption down there. So I mean, I don't know for sure. He probably died, like getting shot twice in the chest in rural Brazil.
Yeah,
you don't have a ton of medical options. It is what it is.
Yeah. You know, it's one of the best things I think about like the missionary thing is, and I, you know, if I could be, you know, king of America tomorrow, you know, I don't know that kids coming out of high school, you know, should be forced into the military, but I think there should be some kind of a forced service of some kind for at least a year.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and that experience of going from, you know, your experiences of where you lived, and you lived more experience growing up through high school than most kids. I mean, like I was in Lincoln, Montana my whole entire time growing up. I mean, I got more experience traveling just because of knife making, but the typical kid is not. So to get sent to New York would have been an absolute culture shock, right?
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention getting sent to Brazil where you don't speak the language. But I think it would be so beneficial for every kid coming out of high school to have to do some form of service for 12 months, just to go out and see, especially, man, like we just got back from Costa Rica, and by the time we left there, we could not wait to get back to America. And it's not that Costa Rica is not nice, but like, you know, we all kind of got sick. You know, you know, when I was in Mexico, we got sick, like drinking the water. You start to take for granted here in America, you know, clean drinking water just comes out of a tap cold and hot.
Yep.
You take for granted refrigeration. You go to a lot of these countries and realize, like, well, there's not just gallons of milk and half and whipping cream and
that was one of my like in Brazil. That was one of my biggest shocks as we go to the grocery store and like your milk is in a carton just on the shelf.
Yes.
And I was like, can you drink that? Like, how do you? Yeah. What is that? Like,
and there's not necessarily a lot of meat available in these countries because the refrigeration section of those stores is really small. So, I mean,
oh, yeah.
And it's very, very expensive.
Yeah, there's no like packaged meat. I mean, even as far as the water, like everyone down there drinks Coca-Cola. Like you can buy a 2 liter of Coca-Cola for cheaper than you can buy a 2 liter of water.
Yeah.
Just because everyone knows it's sanitary, it's clean, and everyone drinks Coke down there. It's crazy.
I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, the meat section really surprised me. Like looking for a breakfast meat, looking for dinner meat. It was very, very limited. And then you know, septic services. You know, the toilet. And sometimes the lack of toilets or the way. And Costa Rica is much more advanced than like some countries. I mean, some countries, you know, Jessica Byers just got home from their hunt in Greenland, and they just had a bucket in a room, and they all, like 5 guides and Riley and Jess, and they were all using the same 5-gallon bucket. And she's like, they let it get like literally brim full. I mean, they were joking that the guys were getting nervous to use it because they were worried their balls were going to be hanging in
dipping in there. Oh.
But I mean, it's literally like, but that's norm for them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you know, we see people crap on our own country, and you know, our country's unfair, and our country's this and that, and whatever. And everybody, you know, I'm going to move out of this country if so and so gets elected, and it's like, man, you have no idea how.
It's like you should do that. Like,
you should
go give it a year somewhere else, and
yeah,
I think people take a lot for granted here.
Yeah, there's very few countries you're going to go to and find your standard of living is the same.
Yeah.
You know, you go to some European countries, you go to Canada, and things are going to be different, but sanitary and similar. But most countries you're going to go to are definitely not where we're sitting, where we're at. And just the ability to have transportation.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you see these, and I'm sure you saw it in Brazil. In Costa Rica, and especially when I was in the Middle East too, the people on motorcycles.
Oh, I saw a family of 5 on a motorcycle, and I was like, it's like a circus act. Like, how do you do that?
There's no, it feels like in those countries, a lot of those people have just like quite literally no thought of self-preservation or dying. Like,
oh, yeah.
No care of like.
Yeah, I feel like the value for life is like different.
It's so
from what we have here. I remember my first actual day in Brazil. We just got to our apartment. It was a second story apartment. We had like a little corner balcony over this 4-way intersection, and there was a guy on a moped who was coming back from the grocery store and had one of those big, it's like a 5-pound tube of ground beef.
Yeah,
and he's like holding it on his chest, and he's coming through this intersection. A car comes 90 degrees to him and like clips him a little bit, and it pushes him into like the corner of the curb, and he lands chest down on this 5-pound tube of meat, and it splatters out.
Oh my God.
But we didn't know.
Looked like his guts.
Oh yeah, it looks like this dude just exploded on the curb, and we're looking down from above on the corner, and everyone's freaking out, and this dog's running over and like eating the ground beef off the thing, and everyone's just like pandemonium. And he like stands up. I think he like twisted his ankle or something. Like he was not hurt at all, but he stands up and he's just like brushing the meat off. Everyone thought he was like dead. Like it was so funny.
That is wild.
It was awesome.
Well, you see, like in Costa Rica, we'd be driving along. People pull out to pass. I'd be following a car, and there'd be a motorcycle right on their bumper. And then they pull out to pass that car, and there's an oncoming, like, truck of chickens.
Yeah.
And the guy pulls out and just starts driving straight at the front of that truck.
Yeah.
And just counting on the truck to move over.
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean,
it's like,
same thing in New York, like all the crosswalks, like there'd be full traffic going, and people just like be looking at their phone and just like step into the street, assuming that everyone's going to stop.
Yeah.
And they do. And it's like that took so long to get used to. It's just like the flow of how people move around the city is like a completely different lifestyle.
When I started going to New York for knife shows when I was probably 17, 18. First time I got into the spring show in New York. Mm-hmm. And it was such a shocker going from Lincoln, Montana. We had one flashing yellow light, like one flashing yellow. When I came to like Missoula, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And to New York, and God, I was so hesitant to cross any streets. And it boggled my mind. It's like, how do people not die hourly?
Oh, yeah. Like,
you know,
how are you not just getting
and that
crazy
was
wrecks?
big time yellow cab era.
Yeah.
There wasn't an Uber. It was just the streets were 95% yellow cabs.
Yep.
And most of those people had immigrated from some country, come in, couldn't speak any English, and they were flying around in cabs.
Yep.
I got car sick, and I don't know how many cabs in New York. I would just say, just let me out, like right here. And I would walk like the last 15 blocks back, because it's like if I go in this cab another 2 blocks, I'm going to be hurling. Yeah, it's interesting when you travel the world. Like when I was in Istanbul, Turkey, that was really the first time I'd been somewhere where, in my life, where like safety and security was
like an afterthought.
Sketchy. Yeah. That was the first time I was really exposed to something like that. And that's why I think that exposure that unfortunately kids in rural areas, not just rural, I mean, if you grew up in an apartment in New York, you know, you're low income, whatever, like you're not going to get to travel to other countries. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I was really good friends. We became friends with some NYPD people there, and they said those people will grow up in an apartment and they might move into like the next building or the next floor and raise their family there. I mean, some of those apartments are generational.
Oh, for sure. Without a doubt.
Especially like on their block.
Yeah.
And like you said, you travel from block to block, and New York changes completely, ethnicity.
Oh, food, language, like it's crazy.
Yeah.
You'd get a lot of those apartments where like there's multiple generations of family living in an apartment.
Yep.
And like the old ones would die off and the young ones would grow up, and it's just like.
But that's really common in other countries.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super common. And I think really with the price of housing and the way we see America going, I think that's going to become
necessary almost.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Where kids stay living at home until they're in their 30s, where they finally get enough money to go get their own place. It's tough to graduate high school and just go get an apartment.
Absolutely.
But well, here at MKC, I wanted to get in just a little bit at the end here of like what kind of projects you've been working on. What has it been? Because when did you start here?
Middle of August last
year.
Yep.
Yeah. What have the changes been like here with like what our abilities were then and now, and working with Jacob? Like what's been your biggest challenge working here?
I think the biggest challenge is we just have so much to do. As a company, we're growing super fast. We have all these projects that need to be done. which is a great problem to have. Like, don't get me wrong, we've got all the opportunity in the world. That being said, with all those projects, there's processes that need to get set up so that we're doing things efficiently and cost effectively. And as we try to bring a lot of that in-house, it's just the volume of work is massive.
Right.
And that's probably been the biggest challenge, is juggling all these different projects. It's great. Like, we've got Ian starting. That's going to be a huge help, just having another engineer. We've been hiring like crazy, so having this larger team now compared to even 6 months ago. Right. I think I was hire number 20, and we're at what, like 56 now, which is crazy to me.
Yeah. Since August. It's insane.
Yeah. But that being said, like, it's super fun. Everyone here is super motivated. I've never been in a workplace like this where everyone's just hyper driven all the time, like day in, day out. Everyone's super focused on what they're doing. And we're very cohesive as like a family. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. We've been really fortunate with the kind of people we've been able to hire. And I think that really started right out of the gate with people like Tristan and Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sets that standard that's, when you interview and people come in and they see like, oh, it's a bunch of young, cool, happy, fun people. And it's not necessarily like a bunch of old curmudgeons sitting on stools, bitching about life.
But even outside of that, like, you've got Jason and Bip and some of these other guys that we've been hiring, like you and Andrew, maintaining the culture above like our direct need for more employees is awesome. Like, I'm so happy that that's the focus, is maintaining the culture.
Right.
I'm sure at the cost of timelines and production. Right. Like, we could go out and hire 10 people tomorrow, but making sure it's the right 10 people is way more important.
Yeah, no, there was quite a hiring process, like trying to find like Jason.
Oh, yeah.
And there were options that we could have plugged in, but man, they just, and we said that even yesterday in we had his review, and it's just like, the technical side's great. It's awesome. And it's necessary. But the fact that he's such a fit that's what makes it so great.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
What are you still making knives on your own? You still designing stuff?
I design a lot more. I still do a lot of like side gig work, mostly like part design and programming and fixture design on Fusion for other machine shops and stuff. I've got a buddy down in Idaho that does like job shop work for people, and so he'll kick me some side work. Or even in the knife community, if a custom maker has like a handmade prototype or like a napkin drawing, I can turn that into a CAD model for them to send off wherever. Sure. So I still do a lot of that. Design wise, I try to do maybe one a month. Even if it doesn't turn into a physical thing, if it's just on the computer, I'll try to design something or sketch something, just so I'm not, it's a perishable skill for sure. I don't want to lose it. So
do you look forward to the new building and the design of the building and that stuff and like all the equipment we're getting?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, like, who wouldn't? Like, if someone offered to build you a forging shop with every tool you could think of, like,
right. Yeah.
Sign me up.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Do you hunt at all?
So I grew up doing a lot of bird hunting. My dad, when he was a teenager, went on his first deer hunt, got shot at, had to like walk up and look into its doughy eyes as he put it out, and it just like ruined it for him. Yeah. So I didn't really grow up big game hunting. He's since seen the error of his ways, and now he elk and deer hunts. Yeah. Now that I've moved out of the house. But we grew up doing a lot of like dove, quail, pheasant. We do like yearly trips up through Kansas, North, South Dakota, doing pheasant hunting. He started a little upland bird hunting apparel business when I was growing up. That was kind of fun to work on for a bit. But yeah, I mean, outdoors, we love hunting. We were camping all the time. It was a good time.
You're gonna have to get a boat at some point just to be able to shoot with people in the shop.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a recurve for a while. I have a little compound downstairs. It's not.
Oh, you do?
A great setup, but
yeah,
I got it like 6 months ago, and I just don't know anything about it.
Well, and it's a challenge when you're busy at work. Plus, you've got young kids and
juggling family and work and
yeah,
learning bows like my third priority. And,
or 10th.
Or 10th. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for jumping on here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
It's cool for people to get to know our people behind the scenes a little bit. And,
Absolutely.
And for me, honestly, it's like we don't get a chance to really sit down and just bullshit. So
yeah.
I appreciate it. Appreciate what you're doing. You've been, kind of an unspeakable giant addition to the shop. So
thanks for having me.
Other than that, you're hard to be around, personality-wise.
That's why I work late.
Struggle.
No one else has to be nice to me. Yeah.
But no, I appreciate it. Head nerd, Dylan Tanner. Appreciate everything you do here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, man.